Hello there, everybody. We're 1 minute out from starting, so just wait a minute and hope people can join.
Your audio's breaking up a bit there, Thomas.
Sorry, I'm having a little bit of difficulty on my end. Is it any better?
No.
I'll just test 1, 2, 3 if you can hear it. Okay, I think that's a 14 test. Is a dot. 2. Yeah, okay. There we go. Should be joining maybe momentarily as they come on. Feel free to have questions into the chat box. First of all, I'm Tim, whiskey specialist in the city centre. Ken Higgy is the cultural and distillery ambassador for Tullamore.
Tim, I think you're going to have to turn off your video. It's near impossible to hear you.
Ready? I end the video off there now. Is that any better for you folks?
Hi, the audio is terrible.
I'm really sorry about this. Evan, I'm just going to turn it over to you. Your audio is better, and I'll ping you messages as they come in from the folks there. I'll keep an eye on the chat box.
Okie doke. Shane, you'll be my tester. Can you hear me loud and clear?
Yeah, I can hear you, Kevin, but there's a bit of feedback coming through from someone.
Okay.
Yeah, it's better there now.
But I don't know if that's because I'm not speaking.
No, there's no echo back.
Ah, okay. You think 2 years into this, we'd have figured Zoom out. You know, this isn't week 1 of a pandemic.
Well, I'd say it's the technology. If turning it on and turning it off still fixes problems, I still think it's the technology and not us at this point.
That's very fair. That's very fair. So we've got a few on now. I'm wondering if there's anyone else we're waiting for in the waiting room. Maybe Tim can put a message in the chat just if there is. If there isn't, we'll kick right off.
I think Alan O'Donovan is meant to be joining as well.
Yeah. Oh, well, we don't mind starting without him. He's a bowl boy anyway. Thinking we can be sitting around waiting with all this whiskey in front of us for him. Speak of the devil.
There he is and all.
Come on in. Get out of the cold. I'm starting to think with these screens off, some people are in the queue to Coppers or something on there.
Well, they opened at what, 6 today?
6 o'clock, yeah. Cheney. I don't know if you're meant to see what happens in Coppers at 6 o'clock in the evening.
You're usually cleaning from the night before at that point.
That's, yeah. Very strange times.
In Dublin parlance, denial is a river in Egypt.
Oh, the dad jokes are out. My dad would be proud wherever he is. Okay.
Yeah, right.
Paddy, Annette, and you're leaving us in suspense because we don't know who the third person is. Is there a puppy in the corner? Is there a child? They've got a cameraman. Or woman. I'm
the puppy in the corner. Paddy she is sitting over there and she's camera shy. I mean, ask her nicely and she might stick her head around the camera just once. But, she has all her whiskies in front of her and she probably has drunk most of them at this stage. But don't.
Oh, wow. Okay, well, that's not what you're supposed to do, but we'll kick off anyway. Some of you guys know me from previous events. My name's Kevin Piggott. I'm working with Tullamore close to 9 years now. So great to have you on a virtual event. We're used to them at this point. Today is quite exciting because we're going to taste some whiskies that you normally wouldn't get to taste in the Tullamore range. If you come down to Tullamore, you would see quite a large amount of casks resting in our warehouse at the moment. We've got over 336,000 barrels full of whiskey. That's nowhere near ambitious in the sense that we're storing way more than we're selling. It's quite reflective of our sales levels, which is good. But it also means that there's a lot of interesting whiskey sitting in the warehouse. A lot of our tastings, we typically go through the range. Whiskies that you're quite familiar with, our original, our rum cask finish, the XO, the 12-year-old perhaps, maybe even the nice single malts, the 14 and the 18. Today we're pretty much tasting exclusively from the warehouse, with the exception being the new make spirit. The new make spirit is very high. It's 81.3% ABV. So just be a little careful with it. I really wouldn't recommend, my recommendation is simply to nose it. If you want to taste it, I keep it for the end of the tasting, because it's just going to limit your ability to nose and taste some of the other whiskies. If any of you do have a sore back, great rubbing alcohol to get out any pulled hamstrings that might happen over the course of the evening. We rarely give out new make. Not for any particular reason, we just don't necessarily, we always think it's quite a high ABV, it can be quite intimidating, but the order in which I want to progress tonight is starting with the malts. We've got 3 malt whiskies. One is the new make. The second that we're going to look at is from 2014. So when our new distillery opened up, it's some of the newer single malt. So we're talking, you know, a single malt that's well on its way to being a really interesting liquid. That's 60.9% ABV. I think yours might have, I'm going to double check. Sorry, 61.2%, excuse me. 61.2. So, and then we'll transition to our third single malt after that, which will be the Rouge, Tullamore Dew Rouge. The difference is you're the first group who, and probably one of the only groups, that will get to taste cask strength version of Rouge. So Rouge is a Dublin airport exclusive that we just launched. The bottle is not really showing because of my Zoom background. But I might put a link to it in the chat. And the Tullamore Dew Rouge is an exclusive in Dublin airport for 6 months. And this is literally the cask strength version. So what's in the airport is 40%. What we'll be tasting tonight is 57.2. So that's what it came out of cask at. Bear in mind, it's a 13-year-old single malt. We'll talk about that a little later. After that, we'll jump on to our grain whiskey, which is quite young. It's from 2018. And then we'll look at 2 pot still samples, one an experimental and one a more traditional pot still cask offering. So that's what the lineup kind of looks like. We'll say a toast as we have each of our whiskies. We'll say a few poems along the way. What I would love is that if you have questions about Tullamore Dew or about whiskey, about the brand, what's happening, any tricky questions, just load them all in the chat. Sometimes people ask them at the end and then you're trying to go back and re-explain it. If I have them all there at the beginning, it's very easy to integrate them as I go along. And hopefully I'll answer any questions that you have in the least political, diplomatic way I can. I have a tendency to give terribly political answers, so call me out if you feel I'm doing so. So without further ado, let's kick off with the single malt new make. Let's pour it out into a little glass. I'm going to mix up my glasses tonight. I'm going to jump from Glencairns to Tua glasses to Sherry Snifters to classic rocks glasses. Every glass offers its own merit or benefit, but I'm just going to mix it up tonight for a bit of fun. So I'm going to pour a little bit of my new make. in this new make was distilled on the 30th of September of this year, so it's not an old new make as such. No, and
Sorry, which is which?
The new make is the only clear liquid you have. So
I have two clear liquids. I have one that's got 2014 written on it, and I've got another one.
What's on the other one?
Single malt sample, clear liquid.
If it's clear liquid, I actually don't know what that 2014 sample is. Sorry, Paddy, if you go on mute there. For whatever reason, it echoes. No, it's Tom. There you go. Sorry, Tim. I'm calling you Tom because your name is Thomas Sutton. Identity theft is a real thing. But yeah, so that 2014 sample, I don't know what that is. That sounds like a mistake in the pack. If you've got two, you shouldn't have two new make samples. Is everyone telling me they have two new make samples?
Well, I think one of the new makes is just slightly off clear. They might just be confused with the lighting.
Like for me, the samples I have here, which are the same you have, are very different. One is clear as vodka, and that's definitely the new make, and it was down as a new make Irish malt whiskey, so that's from this year. The lighter style might in fact be the single malt, which will taste second, so it should have a light hue to it. It is light in color, definitely, but it is evident it has
the new make's just down as single malt. It's not down as the new make, just in case.
Yeah, same here. I've got a new make labeled new make 2014, which is slightly off clear, and then a single malt sample that's completely clear. That seems a real new make.
Okay, so that's the actual new make. So now that we've made that clear, so the 2014 is, as Leo's saying in the chat, is a 7-year-old, and it's actually a single malt, so it's not new make.
Or maybe they were swapped.
So I think, yeah, apologies. I sent the full bottles to Celtic and it was decanted, so I didn't put the those labels that you've got on them. So sorry for that lack of clarity. Hopefully the clearest of clear liquid, zero color in it, will be very evident that it is a new make spirit. If you have a little nose, you'll get that that attribute, that there's a distinction, that there's no wood influence on the liquid. So what we're trying to go for is a green apple note, this light citrus tone. That's what we're trying to capture in our new make. Let's see, I'm going to open up my chat just to make sure I'm seeing.
Hi, Kevin, just to jump in there, this is Tim again. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, sorry about that. I had to get another computer up and going. I had a bit of a failure there. Apologies for that, everybody. I'll let you get back to it, Kevin. I should be okay now.
Okay, sounds good. So on that new make, as I said, it's 81.3, distilled in September. This is our starting point. If you put bad spirit, even in a good cask, it's not going to go very far. It's really important, the quality that you put in. We use pot stills that are made by Foresights. They're very common in the distillation sort of space at the moment. A lot of distilleries have stills from these guys. This is triple distilled liquid, and obviously it's 100% malted barley. Okay, so 100% Irish malted barley. So as I said, I wouldn't really recommend tasting this particular one. I'd keep it to last. That's my recommendation, but completely up to you. I would say that water is your friend in this tasting. I have a jug of water here, so I'm going to add a little bit of water to a lot of my samples just to open them up. In the lab, we're nosing whiskey at 28% ABV, typically around that. It's rarely at this high strength. So no harm to add a little bit of water. See if that makes it a little bit easier to explore. Feel free to put in the chat any comments about what you're getting. Does the green apple, that sort of fruity dimension, is that evident for you? As opposed to if you have ever nosed new make pot still, it definitely has more of a white pepper spice. It is quite different.
Quite a bit of yeast cutting through as well. Very nice.
Yeast. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes people get some of the bready attributes, the getting more berries on the nose than orchard fruits. Yeah. Alan, you're such an advanced palate. Orchard fruits, I'm telling you.
Candied sweets.
Candied sweets. Well, for me, that's quite light. It's quite delicate. That's what we're going for, this light citrusy. Once again, if you know, as new make from Scotland, tends to be much heavier, earthier. You know, sometimes people say triple distilling, you're losing a lot of character or flavor, but actually there's a lot of flavor and character in that. So I don't think it is lost. More copper contact is increasing your ester development. So I think that's quite pleasant. So if you think that's your starting point, your second malt sample, which is the one that's quite light in color that you were questioning, if you pour a little sample of that, you're going to get a sense of what this liquid looks like after a series of years. So this is the single malt, is a bourbon matured spirit. Okay, so it's going into a bourbon cask. You can see the bourbon cask giving a lighter color for sure. This is, as I said, 61.2. So 7-year-old single malt from the early days of distillation in the distillery. Shane's getting sourdough and tropical fruit. Is that from the new make or the second?
That was from the new make.
Oh, the new make, yeah. And I'm going to add a little bit of water to my second sample here. I'm going to have a little taste, so cheers. Definitely, I think on the taste, I'm getting that green apple. I'm getting a lot of the citrus tone that was evident when I nosed the new make, but when I'm nosing this, I'm getting more of the wood influence. Curious what anyone's getting on the nose for that first one. By the way, you obviously don't have to drink all your sample tonight. You can split it in half and have half tomorrow, and you've got 2 nights of whiskey. Completely up to you. Yeah, I am spending a little bit of time exploring them because I would have taken these out of cask a few weeks ago. So coming back to them, sort of re-exploring them, seeing what's a little bit different.
Kevin, have you noticed much variation then from sample to sample, nosing and tasting from what you've laid down so far?
Yeah, I mean, every cask, you can have casks side by side that one seems to have matured spectacularly and one hasn't, completely down to the cask. So yeah, you get a huge amount of variety of casks that look similar, but obviously don't deliver similar results. So that's a constant challenge, and that's all about rebalancing. I know the master blender would say some casks are like, you know, a tomato sauce, and some are like tomato puree. They're so intense. They're like a concentrate. So therefore, you have to watch how many of them you add into a batch to make sure you're getting the net result. When it comes to looking at some of this, the liquid and how we mature it, Tullamore is quite, I guess, complex in how we make our whiskey. So if you think of a lot of other Irish whiskies, if they're double distilled, well, we're triple distilled. So we're doing a third distillation. The second thing is that we have 3 styles of whiskey: the single malt, which we're tasting now, the single grain, which will be coming up soon in 2 whiskies, and then the pot still. So there's 3 styles of whiskey coming together. There's only a handful of triple blends on the market. Very few people do it. Paddy would be one of the more notable triple blends that people be aware of. There's also 2 Stacks, Busker. There's a few new guys on the circuit. So triple blend and then triple cask matured. So we typically use 3 styles of cask for our core maturation. So that's traditional refill. So it's like a B2. your bourbon barrels, your American standard bourbons, so 200 liter. Sometimes we can use varieties of hogsheads, and then your sherry butts. They're the three types that we're typically using. So when we actually make our Tullamore Dew blend, there's 8 different components that goes in. So for the malt, it goes into 3 barrels. For the pot still, it goes into 3. And then for the grain, it just goes into bourbon and refill. We don't put any grain whiskey into sherry casks. It's so light in character that the sherry tends to overpower it. And for us, that's not something we want to do. So that's part of the reason we do what we do, the way we do it. They would have started blending in the early 50s with Tullamore Dew. We call it the original triple blend. It's a bit misleading because we weren't probably the first, but we're the original of what's left of living distilleries. Other blends, triple blends, or things like that just don't exist anymore. Or none are from before our time. Oily and bready, I'm seeing there. Bready, I see that coming through.
Yeah, a lot of people notice the sourdough, the yeasts and that. I suppose like a lot of that's coming down to the fermentation of the mash as well, the kind of yeast that you're using down there. Have you found any kind of old ways of doing it? Was there anything Tullamore did before they left the town, returning anything from the past that you're kind of bringing back into the production of it that might have been lost in the last 60 years or so?
We found a lot of records of old cask types, certain mash bills. We reflected our distillation. Some of our stills are replicas of the 1954 stills. Our yeast wouldn't be the same at all. That's evolved and the science has moved on so much. So we definitely wouldn't be using similar yeast strains or things like that. Yeast for us, yes, it contributes to mouthfeel and that, but it's so much more about yield. So we're using dried distiller's yeast, looks like a protein powder. Obviously, we explore other sherry yeasts. So we did 3 or 4 trials. Can't say we got a huge amount out of it. When you're triple distilling and then maturing for long periods of time, we've struggled to see discernible differences that people can actually pick up. So you sort of question why you go to all this effort of mixing these different styles and trying different things, and then it doesn't produce something incredibly different. It's super nuanced usually. If it was a double distilled younger liquid, maybe that would be more interesting, but for the product we typically make. So how significant is the type of yeast on the new make and mature spirit? So I think it's more significant on the new make, but then for the mature spirit, obviously the more you mature it, more the wood attributes sort of start to counterbalance some of the initial fruity esters and the yeast, the bready attributes, some of the malt characteristics. So it's that constant sort of pull and tug that happens between a new make becoming a whiskey. The older it gets, for me, the less and less that the new make character, the yeast particularly, carries through. Unless, I'd be interested if people have said that they found really unique examples of something in a much older whiskey where the yeast came through. But I haven't seen that to be the case in most instances.
Just a quick question from Shane there about the 7-year-old sample, if that was destined for the flagship launch or not, or single malts.
I mean, this whiskey is already making its way into Tullamore Dew Original. I mean, over 90% of what's in the bottle is from our current Tullamore distillery. So a lot of this whiskey is in the blend already. The Alan's question, where do we source the bourbon barrels? They come from a multitude of suppliers. This particular one was a ex-maker's mark, so a slightly heavier wheat-based bourbon, but not entirely wheat-based, obviously, but having more of a wheat influence maybe than others. But we have a variety. We have probably 5 to 6 different ones that you see quite regularly on casks, and then beyond that, there's the odd rare bourbon cask that you're kind of surprised and you take a second look and go, how did that get there? We do have a bourbon in our company, so we do use some casks from them. We're going to actually taste some spirit from one of those experimental bourbon casks later in the tasting. So here we're going to make quite a jump, right? We're going from a 7-year-old bourbon matured liquid to a 13-year-old. Okay, I'm really excited because this one, the sample you should have is actually, for me, it's the darkest of the liquid. Now, not majorly past the sherry cask pot still, but it's for me, it's the richest liquid that we're going to taste tonight in terms of color. So it's quite strong. It's 57.2%. Bear in mind what we released onto the market was a 40% version. So it was a whiskey designed for red wine drinkers. Okay, it was a triple distilled liquid, a triple distilled single malt, matured in bourbon barrels and finished for 6 months in Pomerol wine casks. So it's the smallest appellation in Bordeaux. It's this beautiful kind of fine wine space. It's not really even a village. It is the.
What is on the label on the bottle, please?
What's on the?
Yeah.
On
Which
the label,
sample?
because describe. You mean the order in which you're picking things is random compared to the way they were presented by the Celtic Whiskey Shop. So if there's somebody there from the Celtic Whiskey Shop, will they tell us which one we're tasting next? Because describing it as the darkest, lightest, or otherwise, there's a subtle difference in color. It would be nice if we knew which bottle we were supposed to be tasting, if you don't mind, please.
Very sorry about that. It was technical difficulties at the start. We should have introduced it properly. I had to jump onto a second computer. Kevin, do you mind explaining which sample we're actually on at the minute for the guys at home there?
So this is the Pomerol sample. Does it say Pomerol?
No, it doesn't say Pomerol. We have single pot sample, surprise new release, single grain sample, and experimental.
So sorry, surprise new release. That's what this one is.
Okay, folks.
Or experimental.
It's not the darkest one out of it.
It's not the experimental, just to be 100% clear. It's the surprise new release, because when I gave these whiskies to Celtic, the Rouge had not been released. It's been released since. So it's 100% the surprise new release. So it's a 13-year-old single malt finished in red wine casks for 6 months.
What color should it be, Kevin? Because
Well, don't worry about the color. Literally pick the sample that says
surprise new release, guys.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, it's quite pale. It's very light when it's in the glass.
Yeah, I guess that's always a difference with a whiskey when it's in a glass versus when it's in a bottle, particularly a full bottle. It's
do you want to mute us now then?
Okay, so hopefully everyone's opening that one up now. They're putting it in their glass.
Is that a single malt?
Yes. So 13-year-old single malt. So as I was saying earlier, we're going with the malts to begin with. So we started with a new make. We did then a 7-year-old bourbon cask single malt, and then we're on to a 13-year-old single malt red wine cask. Okay. So this is called, in the product on the market would be called Tullamore Dew Rouge. As I said, this is the cask strength version of that. So you're the first group to taste that. So it'll be interesting what you think of it at a concentrate level. So it's an exclusive in Dublin Airport for 6 months. It's just to be sold in the airport channel. Dublin Airport's a really important customer for us. We sat down with them 2-3 years ago and tried to come up with a few ideas for a really interesting liquid that they could have as an exclusive. So you can't buy this anywhere else unless there's secret channels of guys buying it and reselling it and things like that, as we all know exist in the whiskey world. But it is definitely a hard whiskey to get. So for me, mine has this little, it's nearly like a rosé tinge to it when it's in the glass. That's the red imprint. We actually did a tasting with our master cooper's French. His name is Engrand. He picked some of the casks for this. It's quite interesting. Would it still be available in March? Yes, it'll still be available in March. It'll just be in a wider set of airports. So the other airports beyond Dublin Airport will have a chance or an opportunity to put it in their airport. But it won't be sold outside airports, with the exception being probably our gift shop in Tullamore. So outside of that, you won't be able to get it anywhere else unless people are buying it through other routes, as in going to the airport and buying 10 bottles and then putting it on their shelf somewhere, which sometimes happens. This liquid is delicious. What we were trying to do with it is have something triple distilled, so it's light and delicate. We didn't want to do a 2-year red wine finish because it might overpower the delicate nature. It's the first time we used French oak, so the actual wood to mature the red wine cask element is French oak. So that's our first time ever to use that, and you get a little bit of that sort of wood spice coming through. For me, there's lots of cherries. Orchard fruits definitely comes to mind. Hmm? What did someone had a tasting note, perhaps? You're allowed to share.
Yeah, once again, if you have a question.
Yeah, someone's saying they're getting the dryness on it. Sometimes that's from some of the tannins that you're getting in the European oak from the red wine itself. And I guess it's probably a little more intense in terms of the flavor profile based on the ABV.
It does have a high ABV. It's fairly highly rectified, you can tell. You still are getting quite a bit of like stone fruit coming through there, almost cherries, stone pips and that. It's quite good. It's sweet as well. It moves to the front of the palate.
Yeah, and I think a lot of your single malt style are going to have inherently a little bit of that sweetness. You're right, it is a high ABV. You know, we brought this, it came out of the cask at 57.2, so we did bring it down 17%. I did want to release it at 46%, but they felt they were getting people who are into red wine to try whiskey, so they wanted to keep the ABV really reasonable, that people felt it was still quite approachable, quite soft. So that's part of the reason went for the ABV of 40% on the market.
Shane mentions plums there in the middle of the palate. Anybody else getting anything like that?
Yeah, Tina and Carson, I will bring some to Dublin Whiskey Live in March. That'll be some hell of a gig. It's a nice time of year to be having it, actually. As usually it's in November, so it'll be a nice change to have it in the Paddy's month, as they call it in the US.
In Paddy's month, in new surrounds as well. We've been the RDS, we hope, for this upcoming one.
Shane, I don't think, well, cask strength at Whiskey Live. I don't know if I've put even my proposal of what I'm tasting. Usually I put a proposal in to Ali in the Celtic Whiskey about what we're doing for the masterclass, and I haven't submitted that yet. So you're having it now. Enjoy the moment.
I just want to get more of it.
That's fair. That's fair. Come to Tullamore and we'll see what we can do. So obviously we have a cooperage. We've got 2 apprentice coopers. They're working away quite well. So the 2 apprentice coopers are local lads. The head cooper is French, as I aforementioned. So he's quite an interesting guy because he's very particular, as the French often are, but in a very good way, in that he adds a lot of quality, I think, to our distillery. He, inspects the warehouses every day. He's going through them, taking down leakers, fixing them. He's definitely reducing a lot of our waste. I often wonder, what we were doing before we had him, because there's a lot of extra liquid that's going to waste or not being looked after in the way it should. If you come down to our distillery, you'll see 2,000-3,000 barrels rejected outside. We've a really strict reject policy if casks are not good. We've had buyers over from big bourbon companies of giving them a bit of a talking to for giving us such poor quality casks sometimes, and having to reject them, and how much of a waste of time and energy and resources that is. So it's important to have, I guess, a cooperage, and these guys working on such important elements of the process. The wood is so important, and then obviously for things like this, it's great to have a cooper to hand who can individually select this small array of barrels. We have probably 6 to 8 different experiments in the warehouse with different wine types, styles. So this is just the first release, the first, I guess, slightly bigger release. We did have a Californian red wine cask finish in our visitor center. We had that was a Cab Sav. That was just the Tullamore Dew original blend, finished in a red wine cask for 3 months. So that was sort of our dipping our toe into that sort of space and learning and understanding wine and whiskey, how the two go together, and just being very careful. We did 1 or 2 2-year maturations in a red wine cask, and it just completely overpowered the essence of our liquid, and therefore you couldn't really tell whether it was Tullamore Dew or other people who had sort of produced it. So Alan had that visitor center wine cask. Nice one. Yeah, hard to. It doesn't exist anymore. It was just an exclusive in our visitor center, and you know how those things go. They just become they're nice to have, but hard to collect. We'll obviously have some new exclusives in the new distillery experience that will open up, hopefully a soft launch in December and open fully in January, all permitting on what happens in the next few weeks. So we'll play that one by ear. But yeah, exciting. Lockdown has been tough for the brand, for the company. We closed our visitor center in Tullamore. We actually sold it the other day to Shane Lowry, the golfer, and Alan Clancy, a guy who runs 15, 16 bars around Dublin. He has bars in Belfast and Portlaoise and Limerick, quite a good operator. He has 37 Dawson Street, House, lots of different bars, Zico, Mrs. Robinson's and Greystones. So him and Shane Lowry have actually bought the old visitor centre, and they're going to turn that into something interesting. So that'll be lovely to have in the town of Tullamore, another venue to bring clients, and pitch and putt course on the rooftop. So, you know, 100 quid to get to play a bit of golf with Shane Lowry if his career goes down the Swanee. Hopefully not. So yeah, that's Tullamore Dew and our red wine. Okay.
It's getting high praise there, Kevin. A lot of feedback in the chat. Will we move on to the next one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What are we having this time?
So this one is it's a single grain, so it's an Irish grain whiskey.
Yeah.
Can you tell me what that's called on the sample bottles?
It's just Tullamore born single grain sample on your sample
Okay.
bottles at home, folks. In my packet was the second from the right.
Okay. So this is quite a jump. You know, I think the opposite of a jump. You're going from a 13-year-old single malt to a very young grain whiskey. So this is literally 3 years old. You know, just about a month over three years. Some of the earliest grain distillate that we would have played with. It's quite high ABV. This one I'm definitely going to add water. It's 71.1. Okay, so we wanted to show it to you in its purest form, and then it's up to you to bring it to whatever level you want, rather than playing with the liquid. So this is taken straight from the cask and untouched in a sense.
Plenty of water, folks.
For me, with grain whiskey, I often find you get something like a metallic or a botanical note sometimes coming through. And then I always think it's accompanied by like a toffee. And it's absolutely bourbon matured. Yeah.
It's quite sweet for a second, but that high ABV really does pack a punch after a second or two.
Yeah, it is rocket fuel, as they call it. Yeah. Mine is quite like a straw yellow, a very light colored spirit. Grain whiskey doesn't seem to have the same intensity in other ways that pot still has in terms of texture. It does have this lightness, this delicate, this yeah, very different. It's, you know what, it's a perfect base. It's a canvas for a lot of other whiskies to play upon.
A couple of questions in there for you, actually, Kevin. One from Liam, wondering if you're reducing the strength of the whiskies before putting them into cask, and from Leo as well, is it another Maker's Mark cask?
Yeah, so if you looked, the new make spirit was on the pot, or sorry, of the malt, that was over 80%, and a lot of those samples are brought down to 64% before they're put in a cask. That's nearly exclusively what we do. We did do trials, but the research sort of shows the science of what flavors you take in from an alcohol standpoint and water soluble flavors at different ABVs, and 64 tends to be the sweet spot. You'll see that across the board. A lot of other people have, I guess, just adopted it, but there's a lot of research behind why that is the case. Leo, this is not a Maker's Mark cask. This is a Jack Daniel's. So I can't tell you which of their variants because I don't know enough about their 25 different whiskies that they seem to have.
Is Jack Daniel's a bourbon though?
Oh, don't open that fire starter, Shane. God.
I think Shane's onto something.
Yes, very good question. Well, we'll add that to our website of our list of cask types that we use. But for sake of it looks, it smells, it acts like a bourbon barrel in every sense, despite its lack of technical intervention by a bit of charcoal. Thank you for that, Shane. No whiskey tasting without one person who always throws something into it, but that's okay.
It really does have something to it for something that's just over 3 years old, even through that high ABV.
Yeah, I'm super interested in what people think, because grain whiskey, sometimes people don't really appreciate it, but actually, if you look at most blends, formulas, grain is such an important base. It's a building block for the other whiskies to play upon. So I didn't say a toast, but I should have. There are many good reasons for drinking. One just came into my head. If a man can't drink while he's living, how the hell can he drink while he's dead? Cheers. So our grain whiskey is obviously made on site. We have our own column stills. We triple distill. We have an analyzer, a rectifier, and a purifier. Of course, column distillation is like fractional distillation. So it is a more complex modern style, but it is an important part of the Irish whiskey process. All your big blends, your Tullamore Dews, your Bushmills, your Jamesons, your Voldemorts, all those big whiskies need an important element of grain to sort of balance out the whiskey. When Desmond Williams introduced the blend in the 50s, why was he doing that? It was essential for Irish whiskey for him as a brand to survive. People did not want to exclusively drink single pot stills or single malt. They really didn't. And, unfortunately, our competitors in Scotland were much quicker to adopt that technology and to really pump out major brands that became massively successful. And, they do dominate world whiskey circles. So they gave whiskey that consumers wanted. They found elements of malt or pot still that gave richness and flavor, and then this beautiful sort of sweet backdrop. So that's all what a grain whiskey sort of brings. There are some brands that do single grain whiskies. We've no intention to do a single grain whiskey. For us, it serves a purpose in the blend formula as a building block, but beyond that, we don't want to necessarily release a single grain. We've much more other or different priorities to bring back a lot of malt and pot still, which I guess would have been more familiar to the history of Tullamore Dew. Do you know what year in the 50s the first blended TD was released? Just asking. I feel like that's a loaded question, Leo, and that could require a good debate. So there's records that say, about what year in the late 40s the column still was actually brought into Tullamore, and then some of the notes said people were just assuming it was 3 years, but actually, obviously, Irish whiskey had a maturation law at that time to be 5 years. So there's a bit of vagueness around when that first one is. Some people in the company think it's 1952. Other people, like myself, think it's a little bit later, just before they closed, so that they tried it and it was nearly just starting to come on board, but it was too late for the brand. Yeah, correct. 1948 is for the grain. So that was where I was of the belief that it had to be at least 53. But we have records that sort of indicate 1952, but that wouldn't necessarily make sense based on that 5-year rule for maturation. But you can guess that, they were trying to do this as a last-ditch effort. Obviously, they had this company then, Irish Mist Liqueur, A lot of our whiskey started being used for this product, which was hugely successful and kept the business going. Tullamore's sort of career as a whiskey brand has been pretty tough, but it's done incredibly well to sort of come out of it. I kind of laughed that, you know, we had Irish Mist and we didn't know what to do with it. And then, you know, as time went on, we sold it, and now we've a honey product that we released in September in 4 countries, and it's already massive. You know, I think its first few weeks, it's sold about 12,000 cases. That'd be more than a lot of Irish whiskies. So in a matter of weeks. So it just shows you that people love, particularly in Eastern Europe, those sort of sweeter palates. Honey and whiskey have always been friends in different ways from the earliest days of using poaching to make it, you know, I guess more palatable when it would have been at a much more raw state. The distillation techniques wouldn't have been as good as they are now. So really interesting to see how things come full circle. And then I think we'll launch the honey in 3 or 4 new markets next year. Yeah, so that'll be interesting. I didn't put the honey in here because we're doing a more cask focused series, and I didn't think honey was the right one to go with. Maybe I'll have some cask strength honey for Shane at the whiskey next whiskey festival that we're at. So
I can always just drive down tomorrow.
there you go. We'll have security on high alert, right? We're used to all sorts rocking up, climbing. We've had men drunk at night arrive at the distillery trying to get in, thinking it was a pub. Like, all sorts of things have happened there. So don't worry, we're used to it.
You didn't forget your keys that day?
No. It wasn't me now, Shane. I'm
No.
very well behaved.
I keep
Very well.
apologizing for that, Kevin. It won't happen again, okay?
That's it.
I actually from about half a mile down the road from the new distillery, born and raised down there. That's actually
Oh, wow.
lovely thing. I'm sure some night I probably would have stomped by on the roads, but
Oh, God. Yeah, she's on a good day. If the wind's strong, you must be able to smell it. So,
will we move
so
on?
yeah.
Will we
Yeah.
see what else we have going here?
Absolutely. So, next up in our lineup is the experimental pot still. Okay.
Yeah, this should be the last one in the pack there, folks, on the far right. But I should say single pot still, experimental sample on the front.
So this is 51.8%. This is matured in a bourbon barrel, but it's a 50-liter cask. So the idea is that you've got a high liquid to wood ratio. The liquid will mature at a much faster speed. So it'll be interesting to see what you think. This whiskey is actually distilled and mature since 2015. So you've got this liquid, albeit a relatively young liquid. It's been in a very small cask. So as I said, you've got a sort of faster maturation speed. You obviously can't speed up time, but when you do have such a small cask, you do get this intensity of flavor. We own a distillery in upstate New York called Tuttletown Distillery. They make Hudson. So this is a Hudson baby bourbon cask. They come in these quite small bottles. They're quite cute. But it's a well-known brand in sort of, I guess, certain parts of America, but a relatively small bourbon. It's not a large scale production. It's a relatively small distillery, but it'd be quite a well-known brand. Would have been the first whiskey distillery to open up in New York State since Prohibition. You know, so quite influential in that sense. It was a bit ahead of the bourbon craze. So I
Just
see
a quick
someone
question
asking
from Alan O'D there. He wants to know, is it from the 4-grain bourbon that they put out?
No, the baby bourbon.
Yeah.
So baby bourbon was their flagship, but we have a variety of different ones from them. We use some of their rye casks and things like that, but this is the most of the barrels from Hudson would be baby bourbon that we have. Some people call them quarter casks. There's lots of different names. In the distillery, you'll often see them earmarked as Hudson casks because the brand is called Hudson whiskey. So this is pot still, 2015. Would have went in at 64%. So it's interesting. The smaller cask has had a major drop in ABV. You're talking, you know, just under 13%. So quite a drop. You do find.
What would you attribute that to? Would that be going in at the high ABV? It's not able to recapture. It's just lost through the cask and not coming back in.
Yeah, it's interesting. It just seems to happen across the board with our smaller casks, particularly with these ones. All the ABVs seems to be around that 49 to 52%. Okay, Leo's saying he actually got to see it. Yeah, a lot of people get to see the casks in the warehouse when you go on a tour. On our new tour, every single person will actually get into the warehouse, and every single person gets a little sample from the warehouse. So our new distillery tour, there's no VIP tours, there's no different tiers. It's one tour for everyone, but the goal is to make it the best distillery tour possible. It's such a shame that a lot of distilleries, you don't get to see a warehouse or you don't get to taste something in a warehouse. So we're trying to tick those two boxes. But yeah, we've quite a lot of these samples. We have no plant, big caramel vibe. Yeah. Tropical papaya. Yeah, caramel is definitely major. These ones I always feel punch, have pack a punch. I love it. It's like for me, it is a concentrate of a bourbon barrel. And I know our master blender wanted to see what that would look like with Irish whiskey. It definitely has a little bit of bite. Quite interested, if people hadn't known the age of the liquid, would they have guessed that it was from 2015? What do you think, Robbie? Put me on the spot now. Would you have thought it was from 2015? Like, before I answer, let me neck this whiskey. No.
You know, it has lost a lot of that new make kind of quality to it, and the kind of fresh yeasty kind of medicinal vibe, acetoniness. But yeah, honestly, I'd probably put it somewhere around 6 or 7 or 8 years. Just on first impressions. But it's carrying a lot of flavor. It's interesting.
Couldn't have been much older than 2015 unless it was middle. Yeah, true. But I was just curious from actually tasting it if it gave you the impression of a much older liquid. Because that was the idea. You're trying to see if something in a smaller cask gives this depth that you can shave off a few years, but get this intensity of flavor.
It's certainly got a lot of the oak on it, a lot of the wood on it, but without you know, being almost too forced about it. You know, you can get some that are just far too much like wet leaves. You know,
plenty of them around this autumn. I just added a drop of water to mine there just to see if that was would change it. I think I probably prefer it without the water actually for this one.
Do you find you're losing much with the tumbler?
Yeah, from a nosing experience, but I guess I've had this liquid to nose a few times. So unlike you guys, you're nosing it for the first time. I've nosed it quite a bit as it's progressed from 2-3 years and so on. I actually had it when it was 3 years old, and it was a little rough around the edges. So it's quite nice to see it's definitely much closer to the mark now.
Leo's saying it reminds him of the Redbreast 10-year-old. I see what he means, but it's better in my opinion of the new one. It actually develops quite well, you know, as Stina and Carson are saying there as well. Lots of plum on it too, you know, like the surprise new release there, the Rouge.
Yeah, anything from a pot still. I actually have 3 or 4 bottles of different Redbreast here, and that's my hallmark comparison. I always want to see if we can stand up against that. So yeah, I'm excited. Like every year when the whiskey gets a little older, I honestly think it's starting to get up there. So I'm very excited. I don't think it'll have to be 12 years to be able to be on par with some of that liquid, but that's yet to be seen.
The Redbreast 10 didn't have as much of a finish and was a bit too spicy for me. But this has a lot of flavor at the front, other than the 10 having the punch of the trad pot spiciness. And it carries a lot more flavor back down the palate.
Yeah,
it's
I'd
staying
agree.
on the palate as well. It's kind of developing there.
Yeah, there was something about it that reminded me of John's Lane, something in that realm with that trad pop, but not quite as oily as viscous, not that level, but something in that direction. Leo saying could be great as an 8-year-old. You want to put it in a leather box, Leo, is it? No. I remember one of the American distillers, I was sitting in a tasting, and he was the Wild Four Roses distiller, and someone was doing a tasting of his whiskey, and they said leather, and he leaned over to the girl beside him and he says, I don't know about you, but I didn't put any of that shit in my whiskey. He didn't like someone describing his whiskey as leather. He said, honey and caramel, that's all that's in my whiskey, and that works pretty fine, or something like that. He was a real old school guy, but I found him very funny. But definitely, I think polished leather is something that comes off. Didn't want to say old boots.
What sort of charring are you going then with a quarter cask like that, or a smaller cask? Would it be something similar to the bourbon casks you're using from makers, or would you be going for something a bit deeper?
No, I mean, we have these debates on site. I mean, being honest, a lot of us on site would prefer toasting as opposed to charring. I know more so for the European wood, but you do find that the charring that they're doing is for such a short period that it's not the level that you're seeing the alligator char on it that gives this richness, but it's actually the depth of how far it's penetrating into the wood. And sometimes the charring isn't sufficient. It's not for long enough to actually, it's giving this impression. You know, if I cook a chicken really fast, right? If I put it on the pan, looks like it's beautifully cooked, and I cut inside and you see pink. That's sort of the impact that there's still a lot of green wood. If you're toasting the barrels, this longer, more gentle cooking of the wood allows deeper penetration, and I think you actually get more color, more flavor. I think it's actually better for the wood, in my opinion. That said, a lot of the casks on site, I would say the vast majority are towards that level 4 alligator char. But I know that's a debate that me and other people in the distillery don't feel that way, but me and the head cooper would be very aligned to that thinking. Particularly when we went to the south of Spain to see the sherry bodegas, and seeing the length of time that they were actually spending toasting the barrels rather than these really quick, charring. That sounds perhaps better, and looks visually probably more impressive, but I don't know if it is in the same way.
Question there from Alan, if you want to address that. When can we expect bottlings of these?
Never, Alan. This is completely a tease. We have no intention to release it whatsoever. We're just showing you a bit of leg, but you're getting nothing. Especially you, Alan. You were late. We held up this whole shebang just for you. I was reluctant, but Tim made me made me wait. We haven't decided when. We've got we have an innovation plan, which is what our whiskey releases should look like for the next 5 to 6 years, but there's a lot of whiskies ahead of this. So yeah, no exact date. We've some other whiskies in mind. As I said, we just launched the Rouge and the Honey, so we've other releases coming sooner than the Hudson. I'd love to see it sort of that 8.5, 9-year-old age before we release it, and just have an absolutely cracking liquid. And I wouldn't actually finish it in anything else. I'd leave it as is.
So you said you've been using quite a bit of, I suppose, authentically Tullamore distilled liquid from 2014 forward in the blend already. When can people expect that the blend, let's say the entry level blend, is going to be 100% Tullamore liquid?
Yeah, I want to say the next 9 to 10 months, hopefully. That's the plan. All things
Christmas
going well.
2022, folks.
Yeah, thereabouts. I mean, it's always, it always depends on where the liquid's at and what the sample's like. You know, when we were slowly bringing down, certain batches had to have more of one than the other, and constant balancing to make sure it was right. It's been a really hard transition. We started November 2019, late 2019 is when we started putting stuff in from Tullamore. So we did wait quite a while. You see some of the younger distilleries brought literally 3-year-old liquid into their blend. And I kind of wanted to show the grain whiskey. It's not bad, but it's still quite young, and you do want your whiskies to get that little bit extra time. We designed building the distillery and the timeline to make sure we had good mature spirits. And when we transitioned over from Middleton, it wasn't this really tight space where we had a 3-year-old liquid that was just going to be hanging on for dear life in a quick transition. That would have been too sharp. So having richer, older liquid, kind of is a good thing. I'd like to think that our blend over time will just improve because we've full control on it. If you're in a competitor distillery, how good, they can't be giving you the best casks, the best all those things. They can tell us they're giving us our spec, and they are to a degree, but I feel like we've so much more control over every part of our process. Having the cooperage now, having, just so many other things, the bottling hall. If you're a small distillery and you're trying to bottle products and you're using a third-party supplier for bottling, and they're telling you, actually, we're behind, or we can't get enough bottles with global supply chain issues, etc. You've got massive issues at the moment with corks. I think a lot of bottles are going to have to change. We are, from an environmental issue, looking at bringing down the weight of our bottle, shaving off some of it and changing it. We'll see what that looks like. These projects take 2 to 3 years to transition over, and they cost well over $1 million just to change your bottle. So just to give you a sense, it's pretty substantial.
Talking about changes there, I suppose there's a lot of gossip out in the last few weeks about changes from the IWA about pot stills and such. Just wondering if anything on the books people can look forward to over the years, something you might try out, experiments, or any kind of theoretical whiskies in the future.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things about William Grant, to be fair, is they always look at the rules and they take a bet that certain rules might change. So we do things, a handful of things, they're all confidential, but there's definitely lots of things we do on hedging our bets that something might come into law or something might change, and if it doesn't, so be it. I know we did that in Scotland with some of the Scotch. They had some releases of products that they were hoping something would change, and it did, and suddenly they were allowed a use of a certain type of cask that they'd put down at a time that wasn't permitted. We've obviously done a huge amount of innovation with mash bills. And then our head distiller was stolen the other week by Bono. Monasterevin Distillery got him. So
future Cassidy's whiskey, I believe, yeah.
I don't know if it'll be Cassidy's, but I thought Mr. Teeling has the rights to that unless he decided to sell it to him. And the current brand name that they have is not Cassidy's, but maybe that's loose gossip at this point. So I don't know what'll be the end product, but I believe they're changing the town name to Bonastreven. That's all I know. That's confirmed.
I hear the streets have no names.
That's all of the above. So it'll be interesting. Question: would synthetic or caps be lighter? Would synthetic what?
Synthetic cork.
Yeah, no, we're going to stick with caps. Definitely caps. You will potentially, for higher marks, see synthetic cork. So all of our 12, 14, 18, any of the older variants have a cork top. No, we'll stay screw cap, but it's just the actual weight of the bottle will drop, I think a decent amount in terms of grams. So when you're shipping millions and millions of bottles, it's quite a good significant difference. It mightn't sound like a lot, but overall it does help. So there's 10 to 15 things we need to do. We did get the highest awards you can get with Origin Green for our sustainability initiatives, but we still have a huge amount to do. So by no means squeaky clean. So I'm sure if Greta came, she'd still give us a bit of a kick to get our act together. But look, we're all on one site, which is great. To be distilling on a single site is hugely beneficial, not shipping whiskey all around to be bottled one place and matured somewhere else. So there's huge benefits of doing that. One of the challenges, I guess, is the reality of, look, we get our casks from Spain, from America, as do all the whiskey. So that's not very sustainable, is it? Synthetic cork is environmentally better than natural cork. That's a question that I'm not able to answer. Super interested if anyone else in the group actually knows, but I think it was more from an availability, that the challenge of getting cork, sometimes that there was massive shortages in that, and the forest that it was coming from were just, you know, having major shortages, or that they were being earmarked to be, you know, not used anymore. So therefore you had to look for something else. Leo saying the cork does not regrow. So there you go. You've just got this limited supply that you're working with. But now we're having a counter. It does. Lads, we'll leave you two in the chat after we all leave. You can discuss whether cork synthetic versus natural, which is most appropriate. But
just a quick question from me there, Kevin, as well. Of course, Tullamore's famous crock pot. People are wondering, is it coming back? Will you do anything?
What do you mean? Is it coming back?
The clay pots.
We still sell them.
Do them, yeah. I'm asked all the time. They're kind of rare and scarce things now.
Yeah, I guess if I'm super honest with you, we don't make any money on it. The cost of that ceramic is so expensive. So the brand team hate it. I'm the only one on the brand team who like it. And I just think it's historic, and I want to keep it for that reason. I think it's a really nice gift.
Yeah, I agree with you.
Yeah, so literally I'm the only one on the entire brand team that's supportive of them. The rest of them are saying, why are we spending a fortune on these cards and not making money on it? But for me, it's just a beautiful historic thing. And there's a reason all the other brands stopped doing it. I think the only other one you could get for a long time was Locks, that was the only one you might find in an airport or something like that. But a lot of the brands who previously had them stopped doing it. And the liquid is the exact same. I have been told by people outside the company who tell me, no, it's different, but I assure you it's the same whiskey.
Maybe it's just the sensation of it.
Maybe, but I've had people tell me it matures in the ceramic. I've had all sorts of things. So
does the clay give it a different flavor?
That's it, clay finished, actually. Yes, Shane, precisely. Make it a limited edition release and you're sorted. Yeah, I mean, that's something we actually, my original vision was to release a pot still in, you know, something like a ceramic. I thought it'd be really cool. But we'll have to see. We looked at alternative designs and might have to go back to them. We're having massive meetings in the company about sustainability in terms of our suppliers and so on. I mean, how we try and be as carbon neutral as possible. We do have some energy businesses in the UK and Scotland that do a lot to counter our carbon footprint. But there's just massive discussion in the company about what's the best thing to do. Oh God, Alan, synthetic Crocs, for the love of God. Now we're talking about shoes, aren't we? Those horrible shoes. But I bet you someone on the call is wearing them right now. My guess is Henry. That's why he has his camera off. It's all, he's embarrassed to show us them. But they're really cool. I have one here. You'll find some of the very beautiful vintage ones. And someone actually was kind enough to show me. They emailed me a picture, I think, of. They have a collection of all the Crocs that were ever released for Tullamore. So there's quite a lot. There was a millennial Croc. There was maroon. There's some green ones. Most of them are that sort of lighter, white-ish style. Yeah, so they're quite cool. Definitely more of a collectible. So
Kevin, do we have any more samples to try there? I thought you were going to go back and try the very young new make.
No, so what I want is that there's a pot still sherry cask there. So does everyone have that sample?
Yeah.
So that's the last one I'm going to open.
So this is just the Tullamore born single pot still sample.
It's 2014. So from the year we opened up, it's 60.9% ABV. And this is exclusively matured in Oloroso sherry casks. So this is probably my favorite liquid in the warehouse. I love sherry matured spirit anyway. I love pot still, so it's a combination of my two favorite things. I just think the two work wonderfully together. My recommendation to the team has been just to release this as it is. Don't play with it. Don't finish it in anything. It's just much richer. I think you start to get into this real, what pot still can be, that gingery crackle, all those beautiful sort of richness that comes from the sherry. For me, the color is really rich.
Quite a bit of marzipan almost coming through it there.
Yeah, definitely.
I've seen sugar and whatnot.
This one's all about texture. For me, it's Demerara sugar. My your bottle is bigger than mine, Colin. It unfortunately is. I have liter bottles of all these samples, and I was originally supposed to share with John Quinn, but I actually got them all to myself.
I suppose nose is very important on this one as well. Like you're getting a lot of information from it instantly. What should people be looking out for?
I'm just adding a drop of water actually to mine first. I want to give it a little bit because as I said, it is 60.9. So it's put in at 64. You can see it's lost a very low level of alcohol considering the length of time it's been matured. But you know, we've tasted people on 4-year-old pot still, 5, 6, 7, and you can just see the character coming into it. For me, it is that ginger sort of crackle. You're getting that Demerara sugar nearly. That, yeah, I think it's sort of quintessential pot still in terms of that spice element, all the sherry cues coming through. Definitely for me, pot still is always about texture. It's completely about how it influences my palate, my tongue. And as I said,
Reinhardt just asking there quickly, how old is the sample?
Yeah, so 7 years old. Yeah, so from 2014.
So this really is one of the first runs of the still with a pot still mash through it then?
Yeah, this is, you know, you're talking about 6 weeks after commissioning, you're getting some really nice distillate in a place where you want it to be, and that you're starting to fill some of your better. So a lot of these are new sherry casks being used for the first time. Yeah, they're super. We have really old sherry casks that we've been maturing lots of different spirit in, and that's where you get a lot more variety. But the new sherry casks, I would actually say the flavor is more intense than we would have thought. So in some of our recipes, we've dropped the amount of sherry cask we're using because they were actually overpowering some of the other elements of the whiskey.
I have to say it's lovely as far as younger pot stills go. 6 to 10-year-old pot stills, I think it's one of the better ones I've tried in a long time. What age ideally would you like this to go to, and would you be using it in blends, or is this a standalone?
A combination. So this liquid already exists in the blend. This is the pot still element that does feature in the Tullamore Dew blend. Will it feature on its own? I hope so. I mean, that's what my hope is, that we would have something in a very single pot still range, you know, or something like that. That's the dream, isn't it? For anyone who's worked in Irish whiskey with a brand that doesn't have a pot still, it's something from day one, it's what I wanted to have coming out of the distillery. So it's been a long time staring at barrels saying, hurry up.
Paddy, Annette and John just wondering there quickly, how long has this actually sat in the sherry casks for?
Exclusively in sherry, so it hasn't been in anything else. Yeah.
7 years in sherry, that's quite good. It's not as dry and intense as some.
That's very true. Very true. Yeah. Someone, let me see what that question was. Has a sweetness that veers towards a PX, must be the single pot still itself. Yeah, I'd say it is actually, because for me, with the Pedro Jimenez, I feel it does tend to be a little more raisin sweetness, which for me, this isn't quite like that. Perhaps directionally, but for me, it's
close to Lustau Redbreast almost. A bit oilier.
Yeah, I wasn't. I really like Redbreast, but I wasn't a big fan of Lustau. That was probably one of the only ones that let me down liquid wise. So it's not. But maybe it's been a while since I tasted it, so I might have to.
Long time in bourbon and then put into Lustau. But if this is just exclusively sherry, it might be.
Yeah.
More. Reinhardt just nominating the Tullamore Dew Rouge as his favourite. Anybody else want to nominate their favorite sample of the night so far? To me,
Right.
this is it. This is probably my favorite.
Yeah, put it into the chat because it's really
Put it into the
interesting
chat,
for
folks.
me. Yeah, really interesting to know what people.
Alan with the Hudson cask with a lot of toffee, caramel, vanilla coming through, obviously from bourbon. I see Paddy, Annette, and John are loving this one. There you go, 2 thumbs up. Emily says the pot still. I don't know if it's this one now or the last one. You've got a fairly mixed bag. This one, Emily, same as me. You've got a fairly mixed bag there. You got several favorites from several different casks. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it's funny because if you do a whiskey tasting normally and you do one cask strength, everyone picks the cask sample that you've picked, like 90%. But interesting. Yeah, just on your question about Pozza, I think, but 8 to 10 years, I'd say closer to 10. But I think at 8 it would be in a place that would be very, very ready.
How do you find it now? If you're going to be bottling, let's say that did end up in a 10-year-old Tullamore Dew bottle, the old Tullamore Dew 10, then would that be shifted away from the portfolio or something else becomes of that? And because I imagine over the next 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to have a lot of different age statements hitting the market. Will that mean that your likes of your old 12, your old 14, 15s are going to be kind of pushed and replaced?
Yeah, I mean, the 12-year-old is a staple. We'll be keeping that. That one will never disappear. The 15 already, we stopped making that quite a while ago. So whatever's out there is just out there. That's residual stock. So we don't make the 15-year-old anymore. What we realized is the 12-year-old was selling really well, and we wanted the 15-year-old is the 12-year-old finish for 3 more years.
That's pretty well.
And then a 6-month finish in that rum cask. So we wanted to stop selling really small amounts of 15-year-old and keep that stock for the 12-year-old, because that was the one that people just by and large love. It did well at the Irish Whiskey Awards there, got a gold there 2 weeks ago. Just consistently delivers. It's a cracking whiskey, and over years going to whiskey events, you constantly get people say that they think that's their favorite in the range. So that'd be John Quinn's favorite. I've asked about the Phoenix coming back, but the brand aren't very much in favor of that. Can you talk about the direction of the core brands once you've transitioned? The direction of the core brands once you have transitioned to new Tullamore Dew whiskey. So, I mean, yeah, it'll be original and 12 will be our 2 staples, and then we'll have a whole series of new releases. There'll be a lot more, I'd imagine, in the pot still a malt category. We have a lot of different stuff. We've whiskey in the warehouse dates back to 1988. So we would have sourced a lot of old malt stock, some of it from 96 back to 88. So we have a huge amount of liquids in different age brackets and different styles. I can't tell you what the release progression is going to look like, because it just changes. Although we have 5 or 6 in the pipeline, sometimes someone goes, actually, it's a better time to release this. We find in a lot of our markets, I had some Czech guests, for instance, the other day, and we were discussing about pot still, and they love pot still whiskey, those 2 particular guests, but their country, no one knows about pot still whiskey. They just see it as a whiskey that, is twice the price of a Scotch. There might be a 10-year-old Scotch in a supermarket there, so they don't understand why they'd pay for it when it's a younger whiskey. Pot still means nothing to them. You've got price sensitive customers in Poland, in Russia, in Bulgaria, a lot of our big markets. The Nordics don't know what pot still whiskey is unless they're, on a whiskey boat, one of these Cinderella cruises. The US is the only place that has a familiarity with pot still. Really, Redbreast are leading the way, getting some good sales off there. But outside of Redbreast, no one knows what pot still is. So that's part of the challenge. Liam, myself and John are very big advocates of Black 43. Love that liquid. Black 43 and Phoenix were like, we call them the Amy Winehouses. Like, once they were gone, everyone wanted them again. They became more popular. I think that's just a characteristic of whiskies. that see the day. Oh, you have a bottle there. Nice one. Yeah, very hard to find. Always getting plagued on the website. People asking where can we get it. Particularly South Africans. I don't know why. There's quite a few South Africans who really like the Black 43. There's a few random examples of how liquid made it its way over there, but it was originally destined for Germany and Czech Republic. It was like designed as a whiskey to get people to trade up to a slightly older blend without breaking the bank, without going with a 12-year-old age statement, which in a lot of Eastern European countries was just too expensive for the Tullamore Dew drinker. So they wanted something that was, just around the 30 quid or a little below. They don't want to go above that price point. So that's part of the challenge in some of the big markets we're in. Other markets like America, we're huge there, but we're actually tiny still. It's an emerging market for us. So we have so much work to do that people know the core brand better before we release more. So there's a bit more strategy at play in terms of the timings of when we release them. Other brands have released other variants and they're selling 600 cases in a market or 200, that's not really worth your while in producing it if that's what you're going to do. Like the honey in Eastern Europe, we knew they loved honey. We used honey from Czech Republic, and already 12,000 cases in whatever it was 6 weeks is pretty good. The goal is to probably sell 60,000 cases of that in its first full 12 months, which is pretty substantial. So that's 9-liter cases. So it just shows you when you recognize and you listen to a market what they want in the right numbers and people are interested in that, then we're happy to release something. But in the meantime, we play the waiting game. We let our whiskey get up to more mature levels. We make sure it's the best that it can be. We don't have to rush anything out. We've got a big business in original, but we do need to be clever in where we release our next few whiskies over the next 3 to 4 years. Any other questions?
So you said the plan was to have a soft launch in December.
Yeah, so we're doing one which is, all your tourism bodies, all your stakeholders, political and so on that you need to have. That's, as of today, being like we're delaying putting out the invites just because we don't know what's going to happen in the next week with announcements and things like that. So we're going to wait and see. But yeah, it'll be from January really where you're going to see proper visitors coming into the place, and it'll be good because it'll be a quiet time of year. We'll get our up to speed, get any teething problems of the new experience sorted out, and then we'll be able to be ready for the busy tourism season that sort of kicks off from March all the way through to September.
How many tourists do you expect, or how many visitors a year are you expecting? I know some distilleries have 40, 50, 60,000 a year going through it.
Yeah, very few distilleries have 40, 50, 60,000. When you look at the 39 distilleries, there's only 3 doing that. And one of them isn't a distillery. So it's a really hard market. A lot of guests don't, in the huge numbers that we're talking, don't come outside of Dublin in the same way. We don't know yet. Numbers, everything's been thrown off with COVID. We just don't know what the next, are people going to travel? Will things be open? There's so many unknowns. So we'll fight our corner like we always do. We're not in the easiest place to get to, but we work very hard. We put 100 million into a bog in Tullamore for a reason. We wanted to, build it and they'll come. And I reckon from a visitor experience, it'll be the best distillery experience in Ireland. So
thanks very much for doing it. I have to say, it's my hometown. It's a lovely little town. Anybody watching here this evening, you should pop down for a visit now in the coming year when we can. Cool.
And I just put a virtual tour of the distillery pre our elevated experience on it. So not the elements that we've just added, but there's a quick look around the distillery if you want to see the warehouses and some of the different elements of the distillery. And then I have an Irish pub poem, the Lament of the Irish pub, which was I think I wrote with a friend of mine. It was all about sort of the Irish pub and the challenges it goes through, but it being a cultural cornerstone. I feel what's happening now is probably a very tough time for a lot of Irish pubs. So hopefully they'll come through it. They're museums you can drink in. We often forget that. But have a look at them later if you want. But I hope you enjoy your night. If you have any further questions, send us a message on social media. A few of the guys have it there, Kevin Piggott or Tullamore Kevin on Instagram. Happy to answer anything, and hopefully we get to see you at Whiskey Live next year, or at the distillery itself, or somewhere else along the road.
I just want to thank everybody for tuning in there as well on behalf of Celtic Whiskey, and apologies again for the technical difficulties at the start of the video. Thank you for your patience. Thank you, Kevin. It's been very informative. I have to say, I'm blown away by what Tullamore is offering. I'm sure a lot of other people there are as well. Seems to be a drink for pretty much everybody in attendance. So great work. A lot of expectations being put on Tullamore for the last 7-8 years since rebuilding. So good to see it's going in a great direction.
Cool. Glad to hear. Thank you, guys. Apologies for some of the label mix-ups and those type of things. Sorry, that should have been more clear. So apologies about that.
Again, myself as well, wish to apologize for that. Had the start run a bit smoother, we probably would have went through it a bit. So hopefully tune in for the rest of the Celtic Whiskey Festival and we won't have those sort of hiccups.
All right. Slán, thanks a million,
Right,
guys.
yeah.
Have a nice
Slán,
night.
lad. Thanks,
All right.
everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night and thank you.